a few months ago, after knowing Eckhart Tolle for a while and studying the books, I woke up and I suddenly got it. I understood suddenly how thought was just an illusory thing. And how thought is responsible for, if not all, most of the suffering we experience. And then I suddenly felt like I was looking at these thoughts from another perspective. And I wondered, who is it that's aware that I'm thinking? And suddenly I was thrown into this expansive, amazing feeling of freedom from myself, from my problems. I saw that I was bigger than what I do. I was bigger than my body. I was everything and everyone. I was no longer a fragment of the universe. I was the universe. And ever since that day, I've been trying to get back there. It comes and it goes. It's like riding a wave. Sometimes I'm on, sometimes I'm off. But at least I know where I want to go. And that I want to take as many people with me as I possibly can.
Jim Carrey, isn't he a fabulous storyteller? He is really good at his craft. Wish I could just absorb some of his talent for storytelling, make this presentation a bit more interesting. Anyway, welcome to the fourth podcast. And this podcast concerns contrasting the difference between perceptual experiences and knowledge. So there's a few terms that I want to describe, conceptualize, so we're all on the same page. So the first idea or concept or word is intelligence. So intelligence, in the use that I am familiar with, means information or data or memories, things like that, like the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, is an agency that collects particular information that they target, about arms and economies and God knows what, cultural developments, religions, maybe, that kind of thing. So intelligence, as I see it, refers to informations. And for example, when we go into human or our or mine and yours consciousness, this is an important distinction. So intelligence, purely information. And of course, these days we have artificial intelligence, where computers just have huge amounts of information, of data stored and available for use. So that's intelligence. Then there is intellect. Now, intellect relates to abstract thinking, problem solving in a higher level than just basically intelligence recombinations do, or stored memories bring that back into play. Learned behaviors, learned skills. So intellect, maybe you should say lateral thinking, is an idea of intellect. We can all learn about, for example, musical notes. It doesn't mean that suddenly we can compose something. So composition requires a lot of skills, but it also requires a certain intellect. So intellect is really, really interesting, and I'm going into that a little bit more in a second. But the third um, term or concept or idea or word is knowledge. Now, knowledge is very interesting, but knowledge is concerning truth. So, truth is true, always is true, um, in all circumstance, everywhere and nowhere. Truth is always true, and therefore it's eternal, it doesn't change. Yeah, so if something is true today but no longer true tomorrow, it was not true today in the first instance. It was just our best guess of what something is, like for example, what we are, what human beings are, etc., etc. So I hope you can have your own good grasp of how you understand intelligence, intellect, and knowledge. But since I'm presenting this, I hope you get a good gist of how I see intelligence as information, intellect about abstract thinking, higher thinking, thoughts that do not come from our brain, for example, and then knowledge. Um, yeah. All right. So let's see. So my question is then, can abstract thoughts, intellect, emanate from the brain? I vehemently will say no. So our brain is very good at computation. It is not a computer, but it still performs computational. Yeah, neuroscience has shown very, very clearly, um, even in experiments like Levitt, that our brain becomes active before we even become aware of a decision that we make. So, which means it's like our brain looks at survival and procreation, and to enable to enact that, it doesn't really give us free will or choice. It gives us a sense of agency, but it's not really there. Although, and maybe not everyone agrees with me there, but a lot of very bright minds, for example, do as well, is that we still have the free will to say no. So brain might give us the impulse and the motivation to do something, and we can go, hang on, wait a minute, no. So let me go through this. So um, yeah, I think computation is blind to meaning. So our unconscious mind and our minds, how to present things, particular, remember as we spoke about the id, the basic self, it has these drives, um, lust, hunger, anger, happiness, all that kind of stuff. Um, but it doesn't have a good idea about consequences and whether that is what we really want in the moment. So we have this higher intellect where ethics, for example, come into play, where we go, hang on, wait a minute, this is not right and wrong. Now, if you look at artificial intelligence, so write me an email and you put all these things, you're an expert, you experience, and you're specialized, particularly in writing emails to whatever, and we'll do it for you. It can even give you 5 versions, and then you say like, it will say like, help me, is that good or bad? Is that what you wanted, or you want something different? Can I maybe tune it up a little bit towards being more romantic or more professional or more you understand what I'm saying? Yes. Okay. So evolution, for example, acts on matter, it acts on the physical part of us, a physical body. So this includes DNA, the chemistry, collective intelligence and consciousness, bioelectricity, what we look at. Yeah, all of that is matter, it's physics, and evolution acts on that. And so our brain then takes care of emotions and moods and memories, perceptions and experiences and all of that. But what I call intellect and will that is free, not the cunning way of the brain making out that you and I and all of us have agency. No, the brain makes decisions for us all of the time. This is very, very quickly, and it's very, very clever in making us think that we are making the decisions. Um, but from outside of the brain comes this capacity of free will to say no. Now, meditation is probably the most well-known tool to learn to say no. And of course, it doesn't happen overnight. So it's a training to become aware of your thoughts and then to see it's like, hey, there's a difference to me that is aware. I have this supercognition of my own mind as it just races on with all kinds of stuff. And what you really realize is thoughts and emotions just pop up into awareness without you having any power behind the scenes of your mind that creates these thoughts and emotions, directing it. No, it happens to you. The brain just goes on and produces all this stuff. However, when you become self-aware of this, and this is why, for example, Jung is so big on self-awareness, when you become self-aware, you can say like, hey, I can say no, no, not this. And in a lot of spiritual practices, this negation of thoughts and emotion is a very big part of it, where you can say, no, not this. If you are now interested, go to the teachings of Krishnamurti, for example, who was destined by the Theosophical Society to become the Maitreya, the new Messiah, um, to set this world right. And of course, he said, no, no, you need to find the Christ within yourself. Remember who you truly are. And it starts with negating all of the thoughts and emotions that your mind is continually bombarding you with. Okay. Now, in this podcast, I will further go into, for example, the use of psychedelics. Now, you have a natural psychedelic serotonin, for example, and dimethyltryptamine and dimethyltryptamine. Um, so this DMT, for example, if given in high doses, actually causes a dissolvement of the sense of self that your brain creates for you all of the time. So this self that your brain creates for you, it's not real. It's really not there. But it's very crafty in making you feel, making you sense that there is such a real thing as this sense of self. And LSD is another psychedelic where you can dissolve your sense of self, and people even have awareness of being one with everything, one with the entire universe, that kind of experience. Um, so, with meditation, and if you start this properly, eventually um, you enter in this ongoing process of undoing of your brain's control over making you believe who you are. So in near death experience, for example, as well, you learn, hey, there is no death, and also I am not a body. So the downfall is if you remain in your perceptional self. You may start attacking your body and like self-flagellating and fasting and all this sort of stuff. Doesn't make a difference. Don't attack the body. The body is there, and you need to actually learn to become very clear about what the body is, what it does, and support it well with proper sleep, drinking enough water, all those kind of things. Um, but if you want to know what knowledge really is, you must loosen the grip that your mind has over you, you true self, your authentic self. And so we need to look at some of the Gnostic teachings as well, which is probably a life study if you really want to go into it. But we can just look at some explanation of people who claim to be expert in Gnosticism. And yeah, so the Gnostic says that the true teachings of Jesus were all about remembering the true knowledge of who you are in truth. So I'm going to touch on a lot of things, giving you all different level of insights, particularly from neuroscience and how close they actually come to the conclusions like, no, the sense of self, no, it's made up. That self really doesn't exist. You are the architect of your own emotions. So you can whine forever, but yeah. Are psychedelics maybe the way to at least experience once that you're not a body, that you can be one with the universe, that your brain actually has a structure that continually gives you the perception that you're separate. Um, that is also an illusion. So I'll go into it. I'll show you heaps and heaps of stuff, also with journaling prompts. And hang in there till the very end. I know my podcast's coming very long, but I dive them up into, dissect them into segments, and the segments are all linked in the description of this podcast, so you can link from one to the other. Try and do the journaling, otherwise a lot of information remains conceptual and it doesn't do anything. All right, thanks. Let's get
I
going.
saw a number of things over my career that made me question the traditional materialist way of understanding how the brain works. The patients I'm going to show you here are real people. I've changed their names, but they're very real people. The picture on, I guess it would be which side, on your left is an MRI of the brain of a young lady, and the black there is spinal fluid. The brain is the gray stuff there. She's missing about 2/3 of her brain. That's the way she was born. The image alongside of it is a normal brain for comparison. When she was a young baby, we scanned her and found this, and we were rather pessimistic with her family about her chances of having a normal life. She grew up a completely normal person. She was on the honor roll in high school. If you met her today, you'd say, oh, she's a bright young lady. She's perfectly fine, missing 2/3 of her brain. This is a little boy named Joshua. He was born missing also about 2/3 of his brain. And he, is that, again, that black space there is just water. He was evaluated by the ethics committee at my hospital, and they recommended that he not be fed when he was born because he was in such terrible shape that it'd be better if he passed away. We rescinded that order and fed him, and he's now graduating from high school, perfectly normal young man, plays sports, he's a great kid. Maggie is a young lady who was in a gifted program when she was young. She's a brilliant young woman, missing most of her cerebellum and part of the central regions of her brain. She has had to have some surgery to take care of fluid pressure there, but she's done very well. She has a master's degree in English literature, and she's a published musician. Nicholas is a little boy who's quite handicapped. He has cerebral palsy, and he's missing both hemispheres of his brain. The only part of his brain he has is his brainstem. He is handicapped. He can't speak. He can't walk, but he's fully conscious. He's kind of funny. He laughs. He cries. He's an emotionally a normal person. even though he is handicapped, even though he's missing his entire brain hemisphere?
We have two kinds of evidence. How would you know this, right? We have two kinds of evidence for this. One is using brain imaging tools like I mentioned, I can find language areas in any one of your brains and then ask, do these same areas work when you're solving a math problem or when you're reasoning about what somebody else might be feeling or thinking? And using these tools, it turns out that the language system is largely silent when we do all sorts of complex things, including math, logic, computer coding, engaging in demanding executive control tasks, solving problems, understanding the world, understanding events, physical and social reasoning. All of these abilities instead engage distinct areas in your brain that are non-overlapping with the language system. Another approach is to examine thought abilities in individuals who don't have a functioning language system. Some individuals sustain brain damage that effectively wipes out their entire language network. These lesions encompass all of the areas that in healthy individuals, like in all of our brains, support language processing. And we can ask, and these patients have severe linguistic deficits, they cannot understand or produce language. And we can ask, do these patients still have the ability to navigate the world, to imagine what other people are planning and thinking, to do math, and so on? And here the answer turns out to be yes. In spite of these severe linguistic deficits, these globally aphasic individuals, this most severe form of aphasia is called global aphasia, they can nevertheless do all the things that you and I can do, and the only thing that they seem to lack is the ability to convert their thoughts into a verbal format and to extract meaning from verbal utterances. In other words, the encoder-decoder system is gone, but the thoughts are the same as they ever were. So brain imaging evidence and data from patients with language deficits converge to suggest that language and thought are in fact distinct in the human brain.
Morphic resonance is a connection across time from the past to the present. And it's a process that occurs between organized patterns of activity on the basis of similarity. What it means, in effect, is that each species has a kind of collective memory. So every giraffe tunes in by morphic resonance to the form and to the behavior of previous giraffes. Every crystal, as it crystallizes, tunes in to the way that previous crystals of the same chemical crystallized in the past. So there's a kind of memory given by morphic resonance in all kinds of things. And in the realm of animal behavior, for example, it leads to quite striking predictions. If rats learn a new trick here in London, then rats all around the world should be able to learn the same trick quicker, just because the rats have learned it here. The more that learn it, the easier it should get everywhere else. And there's already evidence that this actually happens from studies of rats in laboratories. When lots of rats have learned something, other rats all around the world find it easier to learn. And this doesn't depend on any normal kind of connection between the different rats or the places. It happens because of morphic resonance on the basis of similarity. The same applies to crystals. When a new chemical is made for the first time, it's usually very hard to crystallize it. And as time goes on, it gets easier to crystallize all around the world. And I think the reason for this is that morphic resonance connects up the crystals so they tune into a kind of collective memory. So morphic resonance works through morphic fields, the organizing fields of chemicals and biological systems. And the word morphic comes from the Greek word for form. So it's a kind of resonance to do with form, pattern, and organization.
I mean, who am I? Who is anyone, really? When I wake up in the morning and open my eyes, a world appears. And these days, since I've hardly been anywhere, it's a very familiar world. There's the wardrobe beyond the end of the bed, the shuttered windows, and the shrieking of seagulls, which drives Brighton residents like me absolutely crazy. But even more familiar is the experience of being a self, of being me, that glides into existence at almost the same time. Now, this experience of selfhood is so mundane that its appearance is usually just happens without us noticing at all. We take ourselves for granted, but we shouldn't. How things seem is not how they are. For most of us, most of the time, it seems as though the self, yourself, is an enduring and unified entity, in essence, a unique identity. Perhaps it seems as though the self is the recipient of wave upon wave of perceptions, as if the world just pours itself into the mind through the transparent windows of the senses. Perhaps it seems as though the self is the decision maker in chief, deciding what to do next and then doing it, or, as the case may be, doing something else. We sense, we think, and we act. This is how things seem. How things are is very different, and the story of how and why this is so is what I want to give you a flavor of today. In this story, the self is not the thing that does the perceiving. The self is a perception too, or rather, it's a collection of related perceptions. Experiences of the self and of the world turn out to be kinds of controlled hallucinations, brain-based best guesses that remain tied to the world and the body in ways determined not by their accuracy, but by their utility, by their usefulness for the organism in the business of staying alive.
When we feel like a self that is actually somehow separate from the physical world, even though we intellectually understand that that's not the case, there's this intuition, there's this feeling, there's this illusion that there's this I. This is related to the illusion of free will, and the illusion of free will and self are really two sides of the same coin. It's the sense that we are a solid entity, an unchanging entity that exists someplace in our body and takes ownership of our body and even ownership of our brain rather than being identical to our brain, which we know to be the case. And this illusion confuses us about our place in nature and the state of reality on many different levels.
I was fortunate enough to come to meditation when I was 6 years old. My dad taught me meditation, and then I learned from his teacher as well later on down the line, and still I'm under his guidance now, 25 years later. So meditation has been a big part of my life for all of my life, and I've come to realize what meditation really is, and I think it's so often misunderstood. So I'm going to break it down for you today. If you've ever played a PlayStation game or an Xbox game and you get so into that game that you almost become the character that you're playing, you're so immersed in the game that the room that you're in disappears, your whole life outside of the game is non-existent, you're just absorbed in the character that you're playing. Well, imagine that you were to do that for 80 years, and then you were to do that again for 100 lifetimes, or 1,000 lifetimes, or a couple of hundred lifetimes. This is what's happened to us. We have taken on this human form, and we've taken on this human form so many times with such belief and conviction. Everything in our environment embeds that conditioning into us that we are just a human being, that we've come to create this boundary, this inner boundary, that we think that we are this human being. And this is what meditation is really there to start to unwind. So the practice of meditation is really just a tool to help us to unravel all of the conditioning that has been embedded in us over many, many lifetimes, so that we eventually come to the realization of who and what we have always been. So let me break that down a little bit more. Meditation in reality is just a tool. So if you follow the breath, you are giving the mind somewhere to rest. And what will happen is that your mind will run around a bit. It will want to go over here, it will want to go over there. Because over all of these lifetimes and over these years, the mind has had so much freedom to determine and direct you. The mind has been used to saying, I want to do this, I want to do that. Oh, I like this, I don't like that. I feel doubt today, I feel this today. The mind is the thing that has been in the driver's seat. When you take on the practice of meditation and you start practicing each day, you sit in the driver's seat. But there's this tussle. The mind isn't happy with that, so the mind will keep trying to interfere and trying to assert its control over you. And the practice of meditation is that as soon as you become distracted, as soon as you feel any kind of resistance, or there's anything that takes you away, you simply, in a neutral way, without becoming annoyed, you let it go and you just come back to the breath. Now you do that for years and years and years on end, you start to become the driver, and the mind starts to realize its place. And through doing that, you're then in a position where you're able to start to raise your consciousness beyond the physical body. So all day long, we're operating through the five senses. And because we're operating through the five senses, and because we've got this embedded belief that we are the human body and we are just human, we're nothing else, we're limited to that. But through the process of meditation, we gain more control over ourselves. We start to actually order what's going on in terms of our internal state. We order that a bit more in terms of we are now in control of the mind rather than the mind being in control of us. And then we're in a position to start to let go of the body. So you'll go into meditation, you'll start to forget about the body. And with that, you'll allow your consciousness to expand. Over the course of time, your consciousness will expand, as in some meditations at least, beyond body consciousness, and you'll experience other things. You'll experience eventually the light of your own self, your own being. Now, this can take many, many years. It can, for some people, take lifetimes. But the point is, all of us at some stage or another have to start this process of unwinding and unraveling the conditioning that partly has been imposed on us through mass marketing and through what our parents thought and taught us, and through our own conditioning over lifetimes of just believing this is who and what we are. Because the truth is, we're not just this human body, and I know that. Lots of other people know that. You may also know that, but if you don't, at some point you have to take the steps towards the realization of that more and more. So that is really what meditation is. It's actually a tool to take you from not knowing who you are to eventually realizing what you are. The process in between is a long, windy, sometimes challenging, sometimes confusing pathway that everyone has to take at some stage, whether it's this lifetime or another lifetime. But meditation is a tool to help you to realize who and what you really are.
You who go where no one else will dare. Will you be my God, architect? Finally I have met you. You will not rebuild your house again. But I am your house. And you live in me. O Lord of my own ego. You are pure illusion. You do not exist. The earth is my witness.
So we touched on this term from Anil Seth, controlled hallucination. We just only really looked at the sense of self, but in reality, our brains do not record reality whatsoever. The entirety of the purpose of our brain is not to record reality, rather to record, create, manufacture experience. And of course, the podcast is on experience versus knowledge. So again, just to hinge in, not to get a level confusion. So who we are in truth and experience through our bodies and our brains and senses are two different levels, to be honest. So we're going to look at experience as it is created, manufactured, produced, hallucinated by our brains. So yeah, it's a bit tricky again as well. So if you look at me and you say, Michael, I can see two hands there moving. Yeah, so can I. So these hands are really kind of here. It's not just like you are delusional, but the color of the hands, the form, and what they are, that's what the hallucination is. So your brain looks at what are these hands for, rather than really fundamentally knowing what these hands are. You know, the billions and trillions of bacteria that live on the skin, everything else, it's not really aware of, not interested. It was the experience. Okay. That's what this life on planet Earth is about. Experience. So let's just listen to the experts and what they have to say.
Definitely don't experience reality the way that it actually is. And some people want to say, yes, we do. Philosophers have been arguing about this for like as long as philosophy has existed. The question of, does your experience match reality, or are you really experiencing reality in its stark objective truth? And the answer is simply not exactly. Reality for us is what we can sense with our sensory surfaces and what we can make sense of with the signals in our brain. The signals in our brain are as necessary for our experience of reality as the sensory signals that come from the world. So I'm going to use a metaphor to describe how the brain works. It goes something like this. Your brain, my brain, everybody's brain, is trapped in its own dark, silent box called your skull. And the brain has no knowledge of what is going on around it in the world or in the body, right? Because it's in this skull. And it's receiving sensory signals from the sensory surfaces of your body. These signals are the outcomes of some changes in the world or in the body. But the brain doesn't know what the changes are. It's receiving the outcomes. And that is what philosophers and scientists call the reverse inference problem. You start with an outcome and you have to guess at the cause. For example, if you hear a loud bang, it could be a car backfiring, a door slamming, it could be a gunshot. Your brain doesn't know what the causes are, it only knows the effect. And so it has to guess. And the guess is important, right? Because you would do different things if it's a gunshot versus if it's a windy day that slammed a door. And luckily, it has one other source of information, and that is your past experience. The really cool thing about this, if that wasn't cool enough, is that it's actually doing it predictively. Sometimes scientists talk about this as the brain running a model of the world. But the brain is not running a model of the world. The brain is running a model of its body. And it's doing it in this really interesting way. In psychology, a group of instances which are similar is called a category. In essence, what your brain is doing when it's making a prediction, it's creating a category of instances from the past which are similar in some way to the present in order to predict what's going to happen next, what the brain has to do next, and what your experience will be next. And so when a human brain is creating a category, you have to ask, what features of similarity is it using? Is it these sensory and motor features? An apple is round, an apple is hard and crunchy, or is it these abstract features? Abstract multimodal summaries of patterns of features. I could take a bunch of apples and I could say, well, these are good for baking and these are not good for baking. And these patterns, this summary, only exists in your brain. Because our brains are structured to construct categories based on the function of things rather than what they look like or taste like or smell like, humans can create something called social reality, which is where we collectively impose a function on objects that the objects don't have by virtue of their physical nature. So a really good example of this is money, little pieces of paper. We all agree that these little pieces of paper have a function of value. And it turns out that many things that we think of as being part of reality are actually like this. We can draw lines in the sand and create the borders of countries, which creates categories of people called immigrants and citizens. We can create governments because we all agree that certain actions, like making little tick marks, has a meaning to elect someone into a position that has certain powers. It's a form of social reality. In our lab, we work on the hypothesis that many psychological categories are forms of social reality. We impose a meaning on a scowling face that it did not evolve to have, but because we all agree that it has that meaning or that function in a particular culture, then it does. To say that your brain resides in a dark, silent box doesn't mean that you are trapped in that box. Your brain has this wonderful capacity to take bits and pieces of past experience and create something completely new that you've never experienced before. We call it imagination. That's a double-edged sword, right? Because our brains are so good at imagining and creating predictions that are not yoked to our immediate surroundings, sometimes we have a lot of trouble staying in the present. You have to practice your ability to control how much you want to be constrained by what's going on outside that box and how much you want to be free of it.
Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett is in the top 1% of the most cited scientists in the world for her revolutionary research in psychology and neuroscience. She is a distinguished professor of psychology at Northeastern University and also holds appointments at Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital, where she is Chief Science Officer for the Center for Law, Brain and Behavior. In addition to the book's 7.5 lessons about the brain and how emotions are made, Dr. Barrett has published over 260 peer-reviewed scientific papers appearing in Science, Nature Neuroscience, and other top journals in psychology and cognitive neuroscience, as well as 6 academic volumes. She has also given a popular TED Talk with over 6.5 million views. You can learn more about Dr. Barrett's work by going to www.lisafeldmanbarrett.com. For centuries, we've believed that emotions are built-in reactions, automatic, universal responses hardwired into our brains. We've imagined happiness, anger, or fear as circuits firing beyond our control, but neuroscience tells a different story. No brain on this planet contains emotion circuits. Emotions are not reflexes. They are not broadcast by facial expressions or body language for others to read like words on a page. They are guesses, predictions that your brain constructs on the fly, drawing on your past experience to make sense of what's happening inside and around you. Your brain lives in a dark, silent box, your skull. It never sees or hears the world directly. It only receives signals, flashes of light, vibrations, chemical scents, changes in pressure, warmth, and so on. These signals are effects, not causes. To survive, your brain must guess what causes them. It does this predictively, like a sophisticated fortune teller, using your past experiences to anticipate what's happening and what you should do next. Every moment, your brain generates thousands of tiny predictions about what your body needs and what sensations will arise. This constant flow of predictions creates your thoughts, perceptions, and emotions. To understand this, imagine looking at a black and white abstract image. At first, you see only random blobs. But once you see the full color original, your brain can never unsee the image within the blobs. That's prediction at work. Your brain uses new data to reinterpret what it sees, turning chaos into meaning. This same process happens with emotion. Your brain's most important job is not thinking or feeling, or even seeing. It's keeping your body alive and well, regulating the flow of energy, salt, glucose, and oxygen so that you survive and thrive. To do that, it predicts your body's needs and acts before problems arise. That dull ache in your stomach might mean hunger, anxiety, or disgust. To your brain, all of these are simply data to correct its predictions, its guesses. This process, called interoception, means your body's sensations are the raw material of your effect. The more finely tuned your emotional predictions, the more emotionally intelligent you become. If your brain only has two categories, good and bad, then every experience is forced into those boxes. But if you can distinguish irritation from resentment, awe from admiration, determination from anxiety, you give your brain more precision tools to work with. This ability is called emotional granularity, the skill of creating many finely tuned emotional experiences rather than a few broad ones. It is the heart of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence isn't about controlling emotion with reason. That's a myth rooted in an outdated triune brain model. Instead, it's about training your brain to predict differently. You can do this by expanding your emotional vocabulary. Each new emotion word adds a new concept your brain can use. You can do this by learning from other languages. Words like tudo bem or bom, Brazilian, things are fine. Gigil, Filipino, the urge to squeeze something adorable. Or fututini, Sicilian, don't care or forget about it. Literally rewire your brain to perceive new feelings. You can do this by seeking new experiences. Read, travel, act, meditate. Every new experience reshapes your brain's predictive map. Every emotion you name or learn becomes a new ingredient your brain can use to make future experiences. You are not a prisoner of your past. Your past experiences shape your present predictions. But by changing your present experiences, you change the very ingredients your brain will use to predict tomorrow. You can seed your brain to predict differently. By choosing new experiences, new perspectives, and new emotional categories, you literally teach your brain how to feel and act differently in the future. As Barrett puts it, sometimes in life, we are responsible for changing things not because we are to blame, but because we're the only ones who can. That's not unfair. It's empowering. It means that at any moment, you have the tools to heal, to act differently, and to feel differently. To be emotionally intelligent is to be self-aware of your predictions, to realize that how you feel is not a fixed truth, but a constructed one. You are, quite literally, the architect of your experience. By changing what you feed your brain, words, thoughts, sensations, stories, and contexts, you transform not just how you feel today, but who you become tomorrow. Your emotions are not hardwired reactions. They are predictions built from your past and sculpted by your choices. When you choose new experiences, you are not escaping your past. You are rewriting it through the living moment.
Hey, we covered some ground, I believe, and at this time, I think it's good to have a formative assessment, as it is called in the world of learning and development. So far, we've really only covered experience. And in a minute, I will put up my mind map. But yeah, of course, you are encouraged to make up your own. My mind map around neuroscience, particularly. But let's just see what we had. We had Jim Carrey talking about the universal experience. In A Course in Miracles, for example, it says, the universal experience is necessary. Without it, a lot of the teachings and lessons remain quite conceptual. So, yeah, the universal experience is essential. But as you see with experience, it comes and it goes. It's not permanent. So you can have that experience, but yeah, if you stay in the experience, you will have left the planet. For us who are still on the planet, the universal experience is a It's an instant, a holy instant, as the Course in Miracles call it. It's a moment, but it's not permanent. And then we saw that there are individuals with bodies where there's hardly any brain or partial brain. And we had to ask ourselves the question, well, what does normal mean? Where do we locate the self if there's hardly any brain inside our skull? Yeah, because we'll have to challenge materialism that says it's all this neuroscience, it's all this matter from which consciousness emerges. But if there's hardly any matter from which that consciousness should emerge, what's going on? So how do mystery and science coexist in your worldview? And what hidden strengths might you have underestimated so far in yourself? Are there talents in you that are waiting to be born? What are you without your story? And later on in this podcast, I want to show you what happens when people experiment with psychedelics, such as psilocybin or magic mushrooms, such as N,N-dimethyltryptamine, which is found in ayahuasca. Lost LSD is another one. Acid, Aldous Huxley and his famous work, The Doors of Perception, from which the famous music band The Doors took their band name. But what are you without your story? If you have a near-death experience, you realize my story, a lot of near-death experience, and my story was just a role-I-played in simulation. It's just an act, but it's not me. So can you function without a story of you in this world? What part of me, you, feels permanent? When all this information comes in, what am I protecting? Am I just like, oh my God, finally, other people, other individual, other minds who've come to see this? Or what are you protecting? We touched for the first time on meditation and the suggestion that you can remember who you truly are through the practice of meditation. But also, we've looked at the point of view from materialists, and that is neuroscience. So I want to show you now my mind map on neuroscience. So you see the branches going off. So to the left top chord, it's just behavior. And neuroscience can study behavior because observing behavior is observing a third party. It's not looking at the first party, yourself. So science is so very adamant to observe and analyze third parties, in particular behavior, and then that can be analyzed and certain patterns might be found, etc., etc. And there is something there I put behavioral economics. So when we do free will versus determinism, we will go into behavioral economics and also decision making. And so we look at a lot of different biases and heuristics. Okay, so then the way neuroscience looks at experience, and I put a whole list there. So successes, challenges, boredom, stories, failures, but particular projection precedes perception. So what was mentioned in the previous little segment by probably the number one expert in the world at the moment, that we create a reality and then project that onto our environment, and then we fine tune it, but we are an active part in it. We're not a passive observer ever. Yeah, So this is neuroscience says we are never, ever a passive observer of what seems to be happening all around us or inside us. We are an active producer, creator of reality by which you then project and then apparently perceive. Okay, it's a trick. So near-death experiences are experiences. And one thing I don't think everyone is really aware of, but it takes 3 hours for your brain to die. So it's not just like, my body's alive and now my body is dead. No, different parts of the brain dry progressively over time. It takes about 3 hours for your brain to be completely dead. And so I notice when near-death experience recount their story, and it is tough because there's a lot going on at the same time. Their minds are actively creating the experience and the story. In particular, in a near-death experience, when you lose from your body, there's an enormous amount of light coming in usually. And that can activate a lot of different things. And if your mind has to interpret that and draw back on past experiences, yeah, who knows what happens. You see a ton of light, but not in everyone. You see divine beings. Christians see Jesus, Buddhists see Buddha, and Siddhartha Gautama, and so forth. So it is an experience, and you cannot take it for complete face value in the way of how the components are, but you can deduct that there is no death, and consciousness is even without a body, even without most of your brain, still conscious. So then we see how neuroscience says that our brains are designed to record experiences. They're not designed to record truth or reality. They are there to record experiences, and that's our memories. And that's why I put illusions versus truth there, and also stories. And then, of course, we have the narration or stories that give us an identity of self. And a lot of that memory is subconscious, unconscious. We have to look at the shadow work according to Carl Jung. And then I train people and promote people into using journaling. Oh, it should be with one L, spelled 2 L's. Spelling is not my forte. And mind mapping. All right.
Or what they might know about parapsychology. But I would say simply to summarize that whole dimension of the subject, that in the past 150 or so years, enough evidence has accumulated from case and field studies, plus a couple of thousand experimental studies, to convince any reasonably open-minded person who takes the trouble to study it that these phenomena exist as facts of nature, period, and that our science will have to expand in some way that permits it to accommodate them. And I think you can take that to the bank.
God has to die is that so superhumans can live. We have to stop projecting our own divinity and our own immortality outside of ourselves. And this is what Nietzsche was objecting to. He objected to religion not because of its extreme claims. He was saying something much more extreme, much more outrageous, frankly. He objected to religion because it made people weak.
Kripal convincingly shows in his book that many of the foundational thinkers in the humanities, like Nietzsche, Jacques Derrida, Schopenhauer, or William James, had a very open mind when it comes to metaphysics, to ontology, and that they arrived at many of their important ideas not only through scientific reasoning.
Some of the most significant individuals in the history of humanities came to their ideas through altered states. We make the mistake of thinking these people thought their way to these ideas. They did not think their way to these ideas. We have to take seriously these ideas as coming from outside the individual.
We're looking here at the website of the Perception Census, an initiative by Enel Thet, who published a best-selling book called Being You. He's a British neuroscientist, very much interested in how experience happens in us, himself and everyone. So let's have a look at this website. You can see there, special effects. Now this is their first statement. That Perception Census is a groundbreaking scientific study exploring the unique ways we each experience the world around us. Now, the census is now closed, and this is a statement around the numbers who participated. So in total, 33,780 people from 133 countries took part, completing 102,689 sections of the Perception Census, making it the largest study of its kind. And it ran for 3 years between 2022 and 2025, and the precise outcomes have not been published yet. So what I thought was very interesting was this. 31% of people who participated in the body and belief section of the census reported having an out-of-body experience at least once in their lifetime. So that means around 10,000 people. And 66% of those people, that's around 5,000 people, said they had such experiences many times. Reports of out-of-body experiences in which a person feels that their consciousness has left their body have circulated for centuries, but are usually confined to rare events such as moments of spiritual ecstasy. The number of people reporting this experience in the census is surprisingly high, but further analysis and more participation from the public in the census will help the team explain why. But we're going to listen to Darius Wright. He's an Aussie living in Byron Bay, northern New South Wales, and Darius claims to be an expert in having out-of-body experiences.
My name is Darius J. Wright, and I've been having out-of-body experiences my whole life. As a child, I've been doing out-of-body experiences, not really understanding what they were, accessing things. And it wasn't until I started to get control over this state, I started to realize that you could have control over the out-of-body state, at will, controlled, leaving your body, accessing the other side. Now, what a lot of people, which I'm excited to be on this platform, is because when people have near-death experiences, they think that that's just a one-time thing, and this can be done controlled and at will, accessing it, accessing the other side, accessing those things that you access through an out-of-body state, because an out-of-body state is no different from a near-death experience. It's a near-death experience controlled. So when you're leaving your body, with me, what I've throughout the years of doing this as a child and understanding this, I've accessed a lot of things, the other side. What people have a lot of misconception of the other side is they believe that it's just airy-fairy, but it's not. It's all the pleasures of physicality with no limitations once you leave the body. Once you're there, your soul is physical. There's contact. It's everything that's here is there. All right. You also access what I've accessed through the out-of-body states is the construct, and the construct is the very thing that we live within. This place is intelligently designed, just like our bodies are intelligently designed. All is intelligently designed here. And when we understand that, We can start breaking down how the body functions based off how the construct functions. I've accessed dead relatives as well. Uncle Bob was telling me about the great work, which is waking people up to the other side, and the many different realms within this construct. 12 realms, supposed to be 13. This is why 12, originally 13 months, all based around 13. And all this connects, all the things that I've figured out as well. The records, what people call the records. It's not necessarily the Akashic records, but there's many different forms of records based off this construct. There's your soul records, which is your soul experiences. There's the records of creation itself, and there's the records of the realms in this construct as well. This is where you get the heavenly records, the cathedral records, halls of the mente, which I've been to these places as well. So to wrap that up of what I do, it's basically it's a controlled NDE, and it's not that difficult to do either, because when you realize the physical body has a electromagnetic field. This electromagnetic field is typically very aggressively attacked. This is why certain things within the physical body become dormant. When you increase your electromagnetic field, which is for people that need to use science, which is scientifically proven that your heart is an electromagnetic field. When you increase this field, also awakens certain cells within the body to activate as well. All right. This is why there's such an attack on the physical body. But once you are accessing the other side as well, your soul, once you come out and you come back within the body, you'll find many near-death experience people as well that confirm this as well. When the soul comes back into the body, certain things start to awaken, whether that's another language at the extreme level, or just certain things within the cellular, your cells start to wake back up, because you start to understand again and realize, standing for the second time, this is where you get born again, is that you are an infinite being. Your soul is eternal. You never die. There's no such thing as death. And all continues. The other side, the soul doesn't die. It's an eternal being, doesn't die. This is where I'm going to take this in two different directions. But this is where, when you're on the other side in your soul, when you want to experience something, you could create that. A lot of people are creating this already through dreams. They're creating their paradise. Sometimes it's hell based on what they're thinking, because what you think, you manifest into creation. This is as basic as the physical sense. When you think of something, we are creator beings on the physical sense and not the soul sense. So what you think when you're out of your body instantly is there. It just manifests right in front of you. And so when people are out of their body and they understand how to navigate this, they could start to have control over their dimensional spaces. Not only that, the soul does create things. This is why we have this place we're experiencing now. Now, when it comes to the physical body, why incarnate or come into this experience? Because incarnation is an event that only happens here within this construct, the earthly realms. Incarnation does not exist anywhere else, because your soul does not need to be birthed into a creation and then die to exit it. When you're there and you're experiencing certain things, you pop into a reality, a realm, a construct for your soul to delight in its pleasures. And then when you're done, you pop out. You retain all your memory. You don't go through a forgetfulness process. But here, through the information that I have access, I'm going to say this as plain as what I've said in other interviews, this construct was created to experience that which we are not. And in short, I'll just leave it at that, because to experience what we are not also gives you a certain perceptual wisdom that could have never been birthed unless it was experienced. This is why when you go into the awakening process, a lot of people think that being awake is an airy-fairy process. It's love and light. And although love and light does exist there is a broad of different emotions that your soul experiences other than that. And once you wake up to that, I mean, then yeah, it's changes everything.
Hey, we're looking here at the publication from the CIA, and you can find this document, this publication, on the net. You go to cia.gov website and then look for this analysis and assessment of the gateway process, which was originally finished on the 9th of June 1983. And you can see there's Department of the Army, the US Army Operational Group, Fort George Meade in Maryland. And it's made under orders of Commander of the US Army Operational Group in Fort Meade, Maryland. Okay. Now, it concerns the gateway process or the gateway experience. And we need to go back to the 1950s to understand what's happening here. So in the 1950s, a person named Robert Monroe, he is from Virginia in the United States, and he produced a radio show, and he discovered that sounds of particular frequencies can have an influence on the brain in the sense of being able to sleep, memory retention, and so forth. And as he was experimenting, I think it was in around 1951 or 1952, I'm not sure about the date, this Robert Monroe had an experience that was later coined as an out-of-body experience, and he then took on this term and popularized its name. So we're talking about an experience, a parapsychological experience. We're still not in the realm of knowledge, we're in the realm of experience, but this is very, very interesting. So he then looked at developing a way, just by using sounds, for other people to be able to have out-of-body experiences. And he found the Monroe Institute in the 1970s, and then originally in 1971 he published his book, Journeys Out of the Body. Of course, the army was very interested in out-of-body experiences because theoretically, through these experiences, you could train people to spy. And we're talking about the Cold War and people spying, etc. Back with the CIA publication. Now, this was published in 1983, so this is over 40 years ago. And it was a bit of controversy. Page 25 was missing. There's 29 pages in this document, and later the page 25 was released as well. And in 2003, 20 years later. So what we're looking at here first is an introduction, and then you see on the right side the gateway experience, brain hemisphere synchronization in perspective. So it uses really nil cost, almost nil cost, except for maybe headsets and audio player devices. Outside of the nil cost to the student system. So hypnosis here you can see is one of them. Transcendental meditation is another one. And then we have also the use of mechanical or acoustic vibrations, usually in the range of 4 to 7 hertz. And also the Bent biomedical model for Kundalini psychosis or transcendence. Biofeedback we see there. And then we see the hemisync. Now the hemisync goes back to Monroe, and you can see here fundamentally the gateway experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focus and coherence to the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output between the left and right hemisphere, so as to alter consciousness, moving it outside the physical sphere, so as to ultimately escape even the restrictions of time and space. So that's a wild statement and a half. The participant then gains access to the various levels of intuitive knowledge which the universe offers. So what differentiates the gateway experience from forms of meditation is its use of the hemisync technique. Okay, there's a monograph and stuff like that. So we're going into 7 here, frequency following response. That is what we now call binaural beat frequencies. Yeah. And here under 9 we have information on brain stimulation. I'm not going to read it all out. Consciousness and energy, holograms, everything like that is part of this gateway process or experience. And then in 14 it described the consciousness matrix, and it basically says that as energy, here we go a bit further back, with respect to stage of expanded or altered consciousness, such as gateway users, the process operates in the following way. As energy passes through various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by the electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon those electrostatic fields of the mind and are perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic field is operating at a frequency and amplitude that can harmonize with and therefore read the energy carrier wave pattern passing through it. Okay. Changes in the frequency and amplitude of the electrostatic field, which compromises the human mind, determines the configuration, hence the character of the holographic energy matrix, which the mind projects to intercept meaning directly from the holographic transmissions of the universe. Okay. So it goes on and on. I think if we go back here, 21, dimensions in between. So now that we have postulated the legitimacy of the assertion that the energy forms which compose consciousness can move beyond the time-space dimension, we need to turn our attention to the energy form which inhabit those dimensions between time and space and the absolute. So there's even a graph here. You really need to get into it, but you see here you have oscillating waves of energy. So what these waves sort of symbolize is that energy goes in and out of time all of the time, which is a bit of kind of idea of quantum consciousness, where this whole observable universe, as we call it, with all the experiences that go with it, faces into time and then collapses completely and goes out of time. But this process, each and every moment, seems to be happening. So as there's the creation of an observable universe, but if you ask me, I agree with it. You cannot be free in a construct. So any construct would have to collapse instantaneously because it's not part of reality with a capital R. It's not part of the absolute. Anyway, there's a graph trying to express that. And it goes here in 24 from Big Bang to Taurus and on and on. Okay, so the interesting thing is that this was published by the CIA. It totally seems to legitimize out-of-body experiences, and it also has this idea of all kinds of information being stored in a collective absolute, and therefore accessible by all. And now for something completely different to out-of-body experiences. And that is the phenomenon of time storms, also sometimes referred to as the Oz factor. So let's just have a look at this particular publication, what time storms are. So, a recurring phenomenon described across cultures where observers experience silent environments, tingling sensations, glowing mist, an episode of missing or distorted time, often accompanied by physical after effects like nausea, rashes, disorientation, and equipment failures. And I can attest that twice in my life I've had episodes of missing or distorted time. So once I did a radio show in Baraboo in Wisconsin. Baraboo is about 40 minutes driving south of Madison. Madison, famous for the Badgers college football team, and of course other things as well. And usually that trip, like I said, took 40 minutes. Now after this radio show, because usually I drove from Wisconsin Dells or Lake Dalton and not Baraboo, we took a different route, didn't recognize much of it, and it only took myself and my wife 21 minutes. So we really cut off 19 minutes. We're almost half the traveling time. It's really, really interesting. The other thing that happened is that we were on a country road. The road wasn't very wide, and this big truck all of a sudden comes driving towards us, and we thought, well, this is it. This must be our exit point. This time around from this association. And no impact. And then we looked, my wife was driving, and looked behind us, and the truck had passed behind us, which is really, really weird. Another time we were driving from Byron Bay to the Brisbane airport in our rental car, and at that time from Byron towards Queensland you had to go through the range still. Now we have a motorway that bypasses the range, and we never ended up in the range. The small villages that we usually drive through weren't there. Different village was there. And we cut off 40 minutes of our driving time. And there's not a Hollywood movie, there's no eerie music playing, there's no special effects. But very, very like do. So I think maybe disqualifies for a time storm nomination or Oz factor. Now the pattern typically includes silence, a precursory pressure or sense of being watched, a glowing or coloured mist, a sudden time jump or displacement, and lasting after effects once the event ends. Now, the term Oz factor was popularised by researcher Jenny Randalls to describe the shared sequence of experiences: silence, tingling, mist, time break, physical toll, across many cases. And some witnesses report enormous global or cross-cultural spread of these events, with accounts ranging from minutes to days of missing time and sometimes dramatic physical changes. So the phenomenon is sometimes framed as a pocket universe or doorway into other times or realities, rather than mere folklore. Now here is some famous time storm encounters. So Armando Valdez, he had an experience in Chile in 1977. In a nutshell, he vanished for 15 minutes and he returned shaken with a short beard, and it was almost like 5 days had passed. So I'll go into that in a second. In 1947, a Nepal convoy. So this is after the Second World War, and the British Empire in India and Nepal was collapsing. So a British colonel and his wife Donna witnessed a red glowy cloud. Accompanying symptoms resembled radiation exposure, like rash and vomiting, with a complete time gap that could not be explained. And then Bruce Gurnon in the famous Bermuda Triangle. He had an encounter with a massive glowing cloud, instrument fail, the flight time allegedly compresses, 75 minutes perceived, and later 37 minutes actual, and the pilot lands near Miami, despite distances suggesting otherwise. He later documented 75 similar encounters. And then Victor Goddard with the Royal Air Force. This happened between 1935 and 1939. So he flew over Drem Airfield, saw a future-like scene with yellow-painted monoplanes and blue uniform mechanics. 4 years later, in 1939, those exact details became a reality in Royal Air Force training planes and uniforms. And then here we have the Simpson and Gisby families in France, 1979. So while driving near Montlumière, they encounter a hotel that seems antique and then disappears. And photos taken here show no negatives years later, suggesting a 17-year time shift. So if you're interested in these stories further, you can Google them and look it up, or on YouTube. There is, of course, documented information on this. Now, here's lots of explanations, frameworks, skepticism, evidence, limitations, implications, notable researchers. Jenny Randall, we mentioned it before, Michael Persinger from South Africa, Jacques Vallée, Philip Dick, and some takeaways. So time storms propose that time is not a fixed, uniform backdrop, but can be altered or paused within electromagnetic or gravitationally influenced pockets, produce both subjective experiences and sometimes physical after effects. Across disciplinary view, neuroscience, geology, physics, consciousness studies is used to explain these events, but definite empirical data remains elusive, as well would be expected. If taken seriously, time storms invite reconsideration of time's nature, like a block universe, many worlds, doorway concepts, and suggest that human perception may occasionally interact with realities beyond everyday experience. So there we have it. So let's have a quick look at one of these stories, the Armando Valdez ordeal in 1977. So this took place on April 25, 1977 in Pampa de Escuma near Putre in Chile. So what happened? Well, let's start with a quote. "You don't know who we are or where we come from, but we will be back soon." So these are the strange words uttered by Corporal Armando Valdez, leader of a Chilean military patrol. And just some 15 minutes previously, he had been subjected to a mysterious encounter at Pampa de Escuma, near Putre in Chile. So you can look that up. It's 50 air miles from east-northeast of Arica, a larger city in Chile. If you want to, go to theblackvault.com and you can read this entire story. So basically, Valdez disappeared for some 15 minutes, and when he reappeared he was shaking, his voice seemed different, and there was this mysterious light illuminating the whole area. And he then rendered unconscious and woke up again emerged in about 2 hours time. So while Corporal Valdez was assisted by his patrol, his men made another strange observation. They saw that Valdez had a beard growth equivalent to several days. And Valdez said he doesn't remember anything from the moment I left here, and he's been interviewed many times, and he said, "I was not abducted." I was not abducted by aliens. And so he said, get ready to leave because it's 4:30 in the morning. And it was actually about 7 a.m. But his calendar watched had stopped at 4:30 in the morning, but the date was 5 days later than it actually was. It had advanced to the 30th instead of the 25th. So this is the idea that he was away, in his experience, perhaps for 5 days, but I can't remember anything of it. No, there's lots more on this page that you can watch. So yes, that's the interesting idea of time storms. And the next interesting phenomenon I want to show you is the phenomenon of the third man. John Geiger, he wrote this book called The Third Man Factor, Surviving the Impossible. Became an international bestseller. Thrilling, the Sunday Times says. Gripping, the Wall Street Journal reckons. Extraordinary, Daily Telegraph. So, what is this third man factor? So let's just look at a few explanations. So this is Google AI, and that the third man phenomenon, or the third man factor, is a psychological experience reported by survivors of extreme life-threatening situations. So in moments of intense isolation, exhaustion and peril, individuals feel the comforting presence of an unseen companion or entity that talks to them, offers practical guidance, and urges them to survive. The phenomenon gets its name from a famous account by Antarctic explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton. During a harrowing 36-hour trek across the mountains of South Georgia Island in 1916, Shackleton and his two exhausted companions continually felt as though there were 4 men in their party, not 3. So the name was later cemented by T.S. Eliot in his poem The Waste Land, which was inspired by Shackleton's account. Now, here we have some famous report. Mountaineering, legendary climber Reinhold Messner. He reported the sensation of an invisible companion guiding him during his solo, supplemental oxygen-free ascent of Mount Everest in 1980. Aviation. During his historic 1927 solo transatlantic flight, Charles Lindbergh reported seeing and hearing ghostly presences that communicated with him and kept him awake during the most fatiguing hours. And then we look at disasters. Survivors of catastrophic accidents, including survivors of the 9/11 attacks in the World Trade Center on Manhattan, New York City, have reported being physically guided to safety by an unseen, comforting presence. Now, of course, there are explanations for the brain duress, dissociations, the bicameral mind. Here's a little YouTube video. I'll leave that up to yourself. Otherwise, we'll get lost in hours and hours of investigations. However, let's have a look at Wikipedia. The third man factor, third man effect, or third person syndrome refers to reported situations where a perceived unseen presence, such as a spirit, provides comfort or support during a traumatic experience. It is most commonly experienced by mountain climbers, but solo sailors, shipwreck survivors, and polar explorers also known to have reported the phenomenon. And of course, this is Wikipedia. Yeah, in the academic world, you cannot quote Wikipedia. Neither can you do BuzzFeed. But I thought this was just interesting to show you some examples here. So the author here on BuzzFeed said, thinking back, I've heard tons of stories in my lifetime that fit the bill, but I never knew there was a term for it. Like with any paranormal phenomenon, there are tons of hypotheses for what exactly third man syndrome is, ranging from guardian angels and long deceased ancestors to our brains psychologically protecting us in moments of extreme stress. Whatever the answer, it seems to be a more common experience than you might think. So recently I asked BuzzFeed readers if they'd ever experienced third man syndrome, and I received far more submissions than I'd ever expected. So, without further ado, here are 23 of the best. I'm not going to go through all 23, but let's just read the first 3. When I was young, around 9 years old, I had to have pretty major surgeries for a birth defect. I was feeling sick, in pain, and frustrated about not being able to sleep or get out of bed. When I rang the bell for the night nurses to help me to the toilet, a smiling man dressed all in white would come straight away and help me. He was so happy and peaceful, with the biggest smile and a bright aura to him. He always came straight to me as soon as the bell rang. The next day, after the second night of his help, I asked another nurse if he would be on duty that night. The staff were very confused, even after my description of him. She told me there weren't any male staffers on duty those past 2 nights, and that none of the porters or other staff wore all white or would have been answering bells on the ward. Yeah, second submission. I once fell about 10 feet from a ledge overlooking a lake. The ledge was above large rock, and as I fell, I was sure I was about to be gravely hurt. Suddenly, I felt a large hand on my back that caught me and pushed me against the wall. Surprised, I turned around to thank my savior, and no one was there. I was dangling over the rocks, feeling the hand as it pushed me straight against the wall until both my feet were secured. I cannot explain what happened that day, but I know there was something there that saved me. And here's a third story. Twice in my 20s, I fell asleep while driving on a highway. Just in the nick of time, a voice from the back seat said my name in a very commanding tone, waking me up so I could hit the brakes. I'm still very much alive, 76 years old, and I figure someone up there likes me. So again, if you like to read more stories, this book, The Third Man Factor by John Geiger, is probably your first go-to. Psychedelics. Well, we're talking things like LSD or acid, DMT, which is found, for example, in ayahuasca, and psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. Now, all of these so-called psychedelic compounds have something in common. That's an indole ring. And this indole ring is also found in the naturally occurring chemical in our bodies called serotonin. Now, serotonin is quite famous. It actually just means yellow tonin. Any word that or prefix that sounds like sero means yellow. So we have blood serum, which is yellow fluid. We have liver cirrhosis, which means there's a yellowing, a fattening of the liver. But also we have serotonin. Now, it's important to understand in biochemistry that when it comes to the brain and the nervous system, there's an interaction between so-called neurotransmitters and neuromodulators and receptors. And there's not always the same outcome for these neurotransmitters or neuromodulators when they interact with receptors. It depends on the site and the mechanism that is activated after that. To give you an example, serotonin is most highly found in blood platelets, which are used for clotting of the blood. So most of serotonin is found in those platelets, and it has no effect, as we know, on your nervous system. Okay, so you might have heard of drugs that are used to influence mood, particular influence depression, and they are so-called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like sertraline. Okay. So it's very, very interesting to notice that there have been 12 different serotonin receptors identified. And the psychedelic drugs do not really interact with all of those, but with the ones that are so important in the psychedelic effects. So if we look at these serotonin receptors, they influence mood, sleep, appetite, memory, how your brain processes information, it influences perception, self-awareness. It does a lot. It also influences, for example, the default mode network. It actually reduces the integrity of that network by about 20 to 30%, so it's estimated. And the default mode network does things like rumination, internal narratives that just runs these stories, self-reflection, but it's also creativity, problem solving. So we see that your sense of self will be affected by these psychedelics. And in particular, the sense of self we have, in particular, we stop here at the outside of our body, and then there's this entire outside world. That boundary seems to start to dissolve, and eventually this whole sense of self can dissolve. So interesting, for example, with LSD acid, communication between brain regions that usually is not really observed or is not really happening, is not really active, can increase by what they have estimated 300%. So we're thinking about things like the visual cortex, the limbic region, which is really important for emotions, and also what is called autobiographical memory. So that's that sense of self. So we can start seeing all sorts of stuff, maybe hallucinate, like what happens when people take ketamine. but in particular, this sense of self seems to dissolve. And so the other thing that's very interesting to notice that there's a thing called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which can establish permanent, or it's plastic, but start recruiting nerves to collaborate over new pathways. So previously what's believed when, for example, the trip with acid wears out after 4 or 6 hours, then everything goes back to normal. But what's now been discovered, the effects on the biochemistry of the brain may cause what seems to be permanent changes and beliefs about the self, which then often by users get connected with all kinds of spiritual teachings and experiences and so forth. All right. Let's start delving in a bit deeper in all
Bright
this.
May morning in 1953, the British psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond prepared a strange concoction in the kitchen of a Hollywood home. The drink was for Aldous Huxley, the prophetic novelist behind 1932's Brave New World. A couple months earlier, Huxley had read about the research trials Osmond was conducting with a naturally occurring hallucinogen called mescaline, and the drug piqued his curiosity. Huxley was interested in testing a theory he'd been developing that the human brain was a kind of reducing valve, protecting us from a more expansive experience that he called mind at large. He wrote a letter to Osmond, who was more than happy to let him be a guinea pig. So it came to pass that Aldous Huxley swallowed 0.4 of a gram of mescaline and sat down to wait for the results. For an hour or so, nothing much happened, just dancing lights and geometric patterns. Huxley was starting to get impatient. But then, all at once, he was gripped by a fiery panic. The scaffolding of ordinary perception began to dismantle, and he suddenly felt that this was all going too far. When he later described what seized him in that moment, Huxley turned to religious language. The fear, he wrote, is due to the incompatibility between man's egoism and the divine purity, between man's self-aggravated separateness and the infinity of God. For a few agonizing minutes, he teetered on the brink of madness, between the heaven of presence and the hell of distraction. But the last traces of ego finally released, and as he walked outside into the garden, he saw what Adam had seen on the morning of creation, the miracle, moment by moment, of naked existence. For the rest of the afternoon, Huxley was absorbed in a mystic vision. Time vanished into a perpetual present. Flowers pulsed with undecipherable mystery, and all throughout he kept repeating, "This is how one ought to see." Eventually the trip wore off, and Huxley returned to what he called that reassuring but profoundly unsatisfactory state known as being in one's right mind. But the trip made an indelible impression, and Huxley would spend the rest of his life trying to make sense of its implications. When he documented his experience in 1954's The Doors of Perception, Huxley concluded that the urge to transcend self-consciousness was a principal appetite of the soul. He came to believe that the widespread availability of this experience through psychedelics would lead to a religious revolution in the culture.
This is the pharmacological revolution which has taken place, that we have now powerful mind-changing drugs which, physiologically speaking, are almost costless.
On the eve of the 1960s, he made a prophecy that psychedelics would transform religion from an activity mainly concerned with symbols into an everyday mysticism underlying ordinary life. 70 years later, that outbreak of everyday mysticism still eludes us, and in many ways, the world more closely resembles Huxley's Brave New World than any utopia. But thanks to groundbreaking new research, we're finally beginning to understand what he experienced that day, and what a true culture of self-transcendence might mean.
Psychedelics are the only drug class that I know of where you have not just one or two, but lots of stories of people saying they took this thing one time, and they say it had this profound impact on the course of their entire life. They really exploded on the scene in the 1960s and were associated with some really radical changes to society. that really scared a lot of people. I think now society is more ready to kind of accept these compounds and the whole picture of them. I'm Matt Johnson. I'm a professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins. I study drugs, principally psychedelics.
What are the main effects of psychedelics?
Yeah, so psychedelics can prompt a wide variety of subjective changes. And so that can span thoughts, the way you think, your cognition, feelings, very profoundly at times, the intensity of your feelings, the variability. You can swing from a terrifying experience to this beatific, sort of like most amazing experience of your life. So the variability, the intensity is there. So really any aspect of subjective experience, including self-identification, how one holds, how they define themselves, how they define reality. And these are sort of the deepest aspects that I think, and the aspects that are most aligned with the psychedelics' therapeutic effects. One aspect that we typically talk about with drugs in general, that's relatively low for the psychedelics, or just their effect on physiology. Compared to the intensity of the subjective effects, it's remarkable how little impact these substances have on our biological functioning. So your heart rate, your blood pressure, how do people overdose on other drug classes? They drink so much, they take so many opioids, they stop breathing. Some drug kills their liver because they've taken too much of it. They have too much of a stimulant, they have a stroke or heart attack. Psychedelics are really robustly safe at the physiological level. There are exceptions. For example, people at very high risk for heart disease, it does raise the blood pressure and pulse somewhat. But all of those physiological effects really pale in comparison, compared to other drug classes, pale in comparison to the intensity of the subjective effects. So it really is those levels of subjective effects that relate to one's conception about the big picture of their life, how they define themselves, how do they define reality, which is why I think something like the mystical experience, which includes this sense of oneness, being at one with the rest of the universe or being at one with the rest of humanity, someone comes out of that, and that has the potential to reframe whatever disorder we're talking about, reframing this, addiction that they've convinced themselves, oh, I'm just a failure, I can never do it. Having an experience like that can really reframe that as, frankly, as small potatoes, and thinking about yourself in terms of depression, and on this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. So it really are those, how one defines themselves. I think it's at the deepest levels. Every psychological experience has a biological correlate. These are two sides of the same coin. You see the color green, there's something happening in your brain that's coding that experience of the color green. So with psychedelics, the biggest divide is whether we're talking about on the psychological side or the biological side. Does it work by hitting these brain receptors and then having other effects, or does it work because of the experience? Clearly, there's this very real biological effect. Something dramatic happens to the brain when you put the psychedelic in the system. But then someone has this experience, and when they change their life because of that, that ends up sounding more like they went through a really good course of psychotherapy. So psychedelics are really interesting at that bridge between the biological and the psychological. What psychedelic means from its linguistic roots is mind manifesting. The idea that these are mind manifesting, that's consistent with this other notion that these are non-specific amplifiers. In other words, you could have a euphoric experience, you could have a hellish experience. Also, terminology is so difficult in this area. Psychedelic can be used to refer to what are called the classic psychedelic compounds, psilocybin, which is in magic mushrooms, LSD, DMT, which is in ayahuasca, mescaline, which is in peyote. Those are the classic psychedelics. They affect a particular type of serotonin receptor, and that's their primary mechanism of action. But then you have other drugs that I think it's appropriate to call them psychedelic. Other scientists will disagree. So for example, MDMA, will work by releasing serotonin. So that's a different mechanism. And you have other drugs such as ketamine and PCP. So that affects the glutamate system in the brain primarily rather than the serotonin system. So what does psychedelic mean then if it refers to multiple pharmacological classes of drugs that work in different ways? And the answer for me is that these are all drugs that can have a profound effect on one's sense of reality, including one's sense of self. The huge question that's always thrown out is, how do these psychedelics work? And you can just come at that from so many different angles. Now, to go down that biological path, what's happening? There's a lot going on. For example, psilocybin, which people may know as the active agent in so-called magic mushrooms, once it's circulating through your blood after you've eaten some of it, it actually converts to a related compound called psilocin, which is the thing that's actually hitting the brain receptors. And it activates a subtype of serotonin receptor. So we have lots of different types of serotonin receptors in our brain. One is called the serotonin 2A receptor. And psilocybin and the other classic psychedelics can latch onto that the same way that our serotonin latches onto these brain receptors. So psilocybin affects serotonin, but then serotonin affects the glutamate system. And then at another level, you had this massive increase in communication across these different silos in the brain. That is probably an important level of analysis that is underlying at the psychological level. Patients who have claims of insight, viewing themselves from a radically different perspective, from a different lens, and based on animal research, there also seems like there may be increased neuroplasticity in the system so that in the days following the psychedelic experience, people are more primed to learn new things. There's a greater ability to establish a new and more optimal normal state. So there seemed to really be something important about the nature of the experience that people have during these sessions. It's not just about hitting a certain type of serotonin receptor in the brain. There's something about the psychology of the experience that unfolds during that session that tends to be important, which is in some sense what makes the psilocybin treatments a bit more like psychotherapy than traditional psychiatric medications where you just take the pill and just, you forget it. There's some interacting reasons why the psychedelic renaissance is happening now. Our society has been in a mental health crisis, and it's been stagnating. Pharmaceutical companies don't make the investments in new mental health care treatments like they did decades ago. I mean, the best medical treatments that we have for many addictions are substitution treatments, also known as agonist treatments. I think these are good, but when you don't see success, I would say it's probably because they fail to get to the roots of these mental disorders, including addiction. And that's why I think psychedelics have been so successful. Nothing is going to be a miracle cure for everyone. Nonetheless, they have so much promise, and we have to have that balance. I think that's more possible today.
The most surprising findings of this new wave of psychedelic research is that unlike most psychiatric medications, psychedelics appear to be effective across a wide variety of mental illnesses. Depression, anxiety, addiction, and OCD have all shown susceptibility to psychedelic treatment. One way of understanding this is through the entropic brain hypothesis. Many different mental illnesses can be thought of as ailments of excessive order. Instead of adversity loosening our beliefs, it leads us to cling to them defensively.
Stuff happens and we're hurt by it, we're injured and we're suffering, but we can find a place, we can do something that steadies us.
In recent work, Robin Carhart Harris has expanded on this idea, proposing a construct called canalization as a general factor of psychopathology. The idea is that the brain can be modeled as a kind of landscape, and learning as the tracing of grooves within that landscape. The steepness and depth of the grooves corresponds to precision weighting, the confidence we have in particular strategies or beliefs. Over time, as we repeat these patterns, the grooves become deeper and easier for the brain to repeat. But trauma can also cause these grooves to deepen defensively, making them difficult and frightening to escape even after they've outlived their utility.
In psychopathology, that could take many forms. It could be falling into a depression, a kind of hibernation from the scary, uncertain world. an eating disorder, we're starting to control our caloric intake because at least we can control something.
The effect of psychedelics has been compared to a fresh snowfall, flattening the landscape and allowing new pathways to be laid down. Understanding psychopathology in this way has also started to shed light on the positive end of the spectrum. In a paper titled The Predictive Dynamics of Happiness and Well-Being, philosopher Mark Miller argues that the goodness or badness of our emotions depends on the rate at which we're reducing prediction errors. Paradoxically, happiness isn't about driving error to zero, but about confronting the unknown voluntarily and finding new errors to predict away.
Pathology is about installing suboptimal beliefs that somehow get insulated because of these nasty feedback cycles. And so what's going to be central to our long-term well-being are all those skills and abilities and ways that we have of locating those suboptimal belief packets and then challenging them in ways that they start updating again, that they become updatable rather than embedding themselves and becoming stickier. We want to find ways of making them more fluid.
In the paper, Miller describes this as a willingness to remain near the edge of criticality between order and disorder, between what is well-known and reliable and the unknown and potentially more optimal. In other words, a willingness to continually die and be reborn in ways both large and small.
That's the meta story, right? Order, chaos, order. But it's partial order, chaos, reconstituted and revivified order. What's the ultimate in order? Doing this. Willingness to do that. That's the ultimate order. It's to let these things go as they need to go. That's a sacrifice. And to allow this continual process of transformation to occur.
At the center of Roland Griffith's research is the so-called mystical experience, as measured by something called the Mystical Experience Questionnaire.
So the core feature of these experiences is this sense of unity, an interconnectedness of all people, all things, the sense that all is one. Sometimes it's pure consciousness. And this is accompanied by a sense of sacredness or reverence, so humility before the majesty of something thought to be sacred.
Other features include the transcendence of time and space.
The past and the present collapse into the present moment. Space becomes endlessly vast.
Deeply felt positive mood.
Sometimes described as heart-opening or universal love, joy, peace, tranquility.
And the so-called noetic quality.
That the experience is more real, more true than everyday waking consciousness.
In the terms we've been using so far, the remarkable thing about the mystical experience is that it appears to transcend the oscillations of chaos and order.
Seeming opposites are reconciled in this state.
One doesn't just get reborn in a more hospitable condition, one discovers a dimension of awareness that, from its own perspective, is eternal.
So what does it do? Well, it's involved in self-reflection, as far as we know, and self-criticism and rumination. It's where your mind goes when it's wandering or worrying. It's involved in time travel, the ability to think about the future or the past, which is very important to a sense of identity. Without a sense of time, you don't have a sense of identity. It's involved in theory of mind, which is the ability to imagine mental states in other people, which is critical to moral reasoning and ethical reasoning. And it's involved in something called the experiential self. This is kind of where we generate the stories that connect what happens to us at any given time to this, the story of who we are. So how interesting that when this network goes quiet, or appears to on an fMRI, that's when people report an experience of complete ego dissolution. What good is that? Well, the researchers, are still speculating about it. They do think that ego dissolution, which some refer to as the mystical experience, I actually think they're pretty much the same thing. One is a spiritual vocabulary, one is a psychodynamic vocabulary. But similar things happen when you lose a sense of ego. You merge with other things because the walls come down. And that permits a reconnection with other people, with nature, with your past self. and that when our defenses are down, we can break out of the stories in which we trap ourselves. You know, those really destructive stories we tell about ourselves, and depressed people in particular, and addicts in particular. The story that says you can't get through the day without a drink. The story that says that you're unworthy of love. We get stuck in these loops of rumination and recrimination. And the psychedelic experience of ego dissolution gives you a new perspective. It's temporary, but you see that, wow, you don't have to think that way. And those stories, they're broken. Their power over you is broken, even if just for a period of time. But having had a taste of that other form of consciousness where you're not the victim of your loops of destructive thought can be liberating. So that's a theoretical hypothesis of how it works, but it's a compelling one.
And when you pair that with this vine filled with hamalas, or the MAOI, it becomes much stranger. Because instead of having a 10-minute DMT trip, you're having a 4-hour journey. Ayahuasca is the most complex hallucinogen that I know of. It's unpredictable as hell. And as soon as I think I understand ayahuasca, the sooner ayahuasca slaps me into humility. I do want to start off by saying that ayahuasca absolutely saved my life. It saved me from a dark path full of addiction and destruction. In fact, it's one of those like defining moments of my life when I first did it. So this isn't going to be one of those videos where I'm going to just shit on ayahuasca and talk about the dark side. But I do want to set some things straight. Because if you're not careful, ayahuasca can end up being more destructive. My first ceremony actually broke me down. I thought I opened this demonic portal and I was going to be crazy forever. And I genuinely thought that there is no fixing me. You know, I've tried therapy and all these different modalities, and to the point where I'm going to the Amazon, drinking this crazy witch's brew, you know, and even that couldn't help me. I thought, no, I'm just a broken person. There is no fixing me. I was so upset that I wanted to leave the retreat the next day. But the shaman assured me that this was basically my ego flaring up. At this point, I didn't know what else to do, but like, you know, I'm here, might as well continue. And the second ceremony, complete opposite. Stereotypical enlightenment experiences where I just felt like I understood the nature of reality, of duality, polarity, or I was able to transmute all the suffering I went through in my life, which I held so much regret and pain over. But I was able to transform it into, hey, this is actually good. This is fertilizer that has brought you on this path to help you grow. We have bigger plans for you, child. Trust. And I was like, yes, I get it. This is beautiful. But why am I saying that ayahuasca isn't 10 years of therapy in one night? Well, there's a caveat to that, because yes, it definitely can feel like it is a concentrated dose of therapy. In fact, some would say that it gives you something that therapy cannot. But there is something called spiritual bypassing, because no matter how profound of an experience you may have, psychedelics, it doesn't do the work for you. In fact, I've learned that psychedelics doesn't actually give you anything. It just opens up a door. It gives you perspective. But pure perspective isn't going to change much. You got to accompany that with action. And, you know, we talk about spiritual bypassing, having a spiritual mystical experience and thinking that you're just jumping up levels in growth. But there's also psychological or therapeutic bypassing, where you bypass the real work that needs to be done in order to move through the levels, which is shadow work, which is something that most people don't want to do, especially in the spiritual community. We talk about Carl Jung and shadow work, and you got to face the darkness. We all talk about this. I've talked about this shit for years. But to actually do the work is a completely different ballpark. The truth is, ayahuasca can show you the wound and help you see the pattern, but it can't apologize to your wife for you. It can't fix your dopamine addiction or make you a good person suddenly. This is why spiritual and psychological bypassing is so common. Trust me, dude, the ego is a sneaky bastard. So much so that you can it can turn this spiritual mystical experience and be like, yep, I'm fixed now. But you have to acknowledge that it does protect you. Don't ever treat the ego as evil. Otherwise, you're going to swing that pendulum to the other side and create this super spiritual ego. Because, like, think about it. Death, trauma, suffering, decay, regret, and the collective madness. There's a lot to take in. I wish one DMT trip could just break you free from the matrix and heal you in one night, but that would be a lie. So don't believe the plant medicine warriors who overpromise the benefits of ayahuasca. I've found that the most beneficial thing about ayahuasca is not the medicine itself, it's the shaman, the ritual, the retreat, the camaraderie with the community, the diet, the courage it takes to take this trip and go to a different country. It's all the above. Ayahuasca is just the cherry on top, and real shamans know this.
When I rebounded off of the bed, I completely left my body. Unlike when I had my open heart surgery, when I had my out-of-body experience then, I came through and I was consciously aware that I was still in this world and saw myself in the nursing staff in post-op surgery, and I entered back into my body and began my recovery. But in this case, I was no longer associated with the earth whatsoever. I found myself a part of the universe. It is hard for me to put into the common tongue what exactly took place, but what I can say is that a higher version of myself was met by two other energies, one male, one female, yin, yang, positive, negative, heaven, hell, however you want to describe it. These higher energies and the higher energy that myself were not communicating as we are now through voice, tongue. Everything was associated with just knowing what I was saying and understanding who and what they were, the higher power. As we're in the universe, a pinpoint began to move towards us. And as the pinpoint began to move towards us, the female energy said, "This one again." And the higher version of myself said, "It's always been my favorite." And the male energy said, "I kind of like it as well." And it developed into a blooming, beautiful garden with ancient marble steps leading up to a platform with a half moon black granite half circle, and water was rolling down the front of it, infinity pool style. And the steps that led up to this platform had two stairwells going behind the half moon black granite pedestal. It was bigger than monolithic. And if you go to the left, you come back to the physical world. And if you go to the right, you ascend. And I was given a choice as to how I wanted to proceed. And it's at this time in which I began to see a version of myself in physical form, still well aware that I am not in my body. The female energy said, "I can agree that the choice is always made clear, whether you return and learn or to the right you ascend." And suddenly there was a version of myself with a long beard and these tattoos that looked at me, looking at me, saying, "It's time to choose." And so immediately I began to make my way to the right side to ascend. And I could see myself running up the side of these steps gleefully. I was happy that I was moving on. And just as I was taking the stairwell around the side of this monolithic structure to ascension, the voice of my mother came through, and she said my name, not angrily, not giddy, but in that manner when you say your child's name in an effort to get their attention. And she said, Michael. And it's the only thing that stopped me. I turned back around and I came down and I said, Mom, I'm so happy to hear your voice. I've seen your signs on earth. I've been waiting to hear your voice. I'm just so happy to hear your voice. And at that moment, it became clear to me what my mother was trying to say to me, that I needed to be here for my family. The realization of the loss and the grief that would happen if I chose to ascend at this time would be very traumatic and overwhelming for my family. And at that point in time, I made a conscious decision to come back. I don't remember getting my phone. I don't remember crawling out of my stateroom. And this span lasted anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes that I was out in this time. However, it was a very long time, or there was no time. There wasn't any time. And there was the total sense of bliss and happiness. I mean, those are the positive things of our better selves, of who we are and the choices.
Like, well, I don't want to just magically forget people that I love in this life. I was trying to explain that that's a human thought. It comes from a brain, it comes from memory, it comes from life, it comes from, but you're not gonna be, when you leave this body, a human body with a brain that has memory, you're gonna be an energy that's so connected to this experience and this whole thing that experience is integrated in you. There is no missing or something missing from that. Experience isn't gone. It's always accessible. Every part of this experience that you have is etched in infinity. There is no something disappearing and never being experienceable again. Like, it's always there. So you don't miss anything. There's no missing anything. You're more integrated with the system outside of the body than you are in the body. And that's kind of what we are, is an individual node accumulating a perspective that ultimately gets fed back into the system and becomes a possibility, an option for everybody else in the system forever. So your experience isn't ever lost.
Before I'm looking at some journaling questions around this psychedelics, just a little quick insertion with me. So we've seen that our brains have a network that's called the default mode network, and it has several functions for us. What particularly we've seen is that it has a significant influence on creating our perceptions, where we create our perceptions before we become aware of it. And we've seen that it is in this millions of a second exchange between our predictions and also our guesses, and also the feedback we get from our senses. There is 32 senses. So the common five, is eyesight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. But there's another 27 senses internally. And so we're active creators of this experiential reality of ours. Now, we've seen with the default mode network, it creates a sense of self, which, according to neuroscience research, is also a controlled hallucination, quoting Anil Seth particularly. So then, what we see is with these psychedelic experiences, they are experiences, and therefore they are created with our default mode network. But what we've seen is that it can be very, very beneficial and therapeutic even, because our sense of self, our idea of who we are, can drastically be altered. So that's amazing. So it's this dissolvement of the sense of self, and be reborn with a brand new sense of self. And then we just saw that in, for example, the Christian religion, that is the very concept of transformation. That when we die to the story of ourselves, so the ego is not really a thing. There's not really a little being inside our head. There's an ego. It's the story of ourselves. So once we then Die to that story of yourself, the attachments that I have. Oh, I've got a PhD. I'm so important. Oh, I won Olympic medals. I'm so important. I'm a mayor. I'm so important. I'm the best mom who ever lived. I'm so important. Um, I'm the best daughter a mom ever could wish for. I'm the best son a mother could ever wish for. You know, the list goes on. That's the story of your worldly self. Now, when you die to that story of yourself, a new sense of self can be born. And we just see that. That if you die before you die, then when you die, you won't really die because you'll already be reborn. Isn't it the stories of the New Testament the early Christians used to apparently say, and of course not in medieval English, but the King's James Bible version says something like, "Know ye not you need to be born again?" What? Being born as a new baby? No. Need to be born again with a different sense of self. That is not the sense of self, the story of your worldly self. So then we also saw this idea of chaos and order. And I'm going to look at a few web pages that are sourced, and we'll get maybe a better idea of the ancient understanding of chaos as opposed to order, because the original understanding of chaos is not the same as the concept we temporarily use to conceptualize complete disorder. And this is the first tab regarding chaos, particularly chaos in Greek mythology. So you can read here with me. It refers to the primordial void that existed before the universe began. So in other words, everything is sourced from chaos. Chaos is then the natural, original, causational fundament of, well, the universe, of reality. So rather than a state of total disorder, that's how we understand that today with the word chaos. So rather than a state of total disorder, it represented an unfathomable, empty chasm. As the ultimate origin of everything, chaos acted as the first of the primeval deities, birthing the earliest elemental forces of existence. So here's a few analytical breakdowns. Number one, the nature of chaos. So derived from the ancient Greek word chaos, meaning gap or chasm. Chaos was the space separating heaven and earth. So in Hesiod's account, chaos was the very first being to exist. It was an endless, dark and silent realm of a void. And Ovid's account, that is later classical authors like the Roman poet Ovid, redefined chaos as a formless, disordered mass of elements. Now, number two, the first children. As the first source of creation, chaos generated the foundational parts of the universe and the netherworld without a partner. The primary children of chaos include Erebus, the embodiment of the dark mists of the underworld, and Nux, the powerful and ancient goddess of the night. And through Nux and Erebus, chaos became the ancestor of many abstract concepts, such as doom, sleep, death, and dreams. And here is a third note, order arising from the void. So, following the emergence of chaos, other primeval gods spontaneously manifested to shape the universe. The most prominent were Gaia, or Earth, Tartarus, the gloomy abyss situated far beneath the earth, and Eros, the primal force of desire and procreation that allowed life to continue. So together the void of chaos and these foundational entities provided the starting point from which the cosmos, the Titans, which were the first pantheon of Greek gods, and eventually the Olympian gods with Zeus, were formed. And the fourth note there is chaos versus Eris. So chaos is sometimes confused with Eris, the distinct Greek goddess of discord, strife, and chaos in the modern sense of the word. So while chaos represents the beginning of the universe, Eris is a later deity famous for instigating the Trojan War. Now, here we have GreekMythology.com, and we can read there, it says chaos, the origin of everything. Chaos was, most Greek cosmologists tell us, the very first of all, the origin of everything, the empty, unfathomable space, the beginning of time. But it was more than just a gaping void, as its name is usually translated from ancient Greek. Personified as a female, chaos was the primal feature of the universe, a shadowy realm of mass and energy, from which much of what is powerful, and mostly negative and dark, in the world would stem forth in later genealogies. Oh, close that one. So what is chaos? Well, chaos as a dwelling place. So even so, Hesiod imagines chaos as something much more tangible than a bottomless chasm. At one point during the Titanomachy, Zeus cast his thunderbolt at the Titans, and in the words of the poet, chaos is seized by an astounding heat. This is a story someone told about the origins of Venus, for example. So moreover, Hesiod seems even to suggest soon after that chaos is some kind of a dwelling place beyond which the Titans live. If so, chaos would have to be the gloomy middle ground located between Earth and Tartarus, which is where the Titans are banished. Some even say that this is the most sensible cosmological vision of all, since in addition to Eros, these are the first three deities ever created in Hesiodic cosmogony. If so, they represent the initial way in which space was split, completed when Gaia gave birth to Uranus, the sky, with Eros being the driving force of creation. Now, chaos, the beginning of all. However, many others claim that in the beginning, chaos was all that there was, the dark majesty and mystery of creation incarnate, and that it was from chaos that the first three primordial gods sprang forth, the wide-bosomed Gaia, or Earth, Tartarus, the underworld, and Eros, love, the fairest among the deathless gods. Gaia would go on to become the mother of everything beautiful in the world. Chaos would not be as fortunate. Out of herself she would give birth to two more children, Erebus, darkness, and Nux, the night. True, their sexual union would produce luminous offspring, Ether, the divine air, and Hemera, the day. However, the progeny of night, Chaos' daughter, feared by Zeus himself, would end up being a string of sinister, ill-starred children. And as some of my participants in my class say, these stories were written by males. So there you go. And chaos in other cosmologies. So here we go. Orpheus and chaos. Aristophanes and chaos. And chaos in philosophy. And then we have Hesiod's theogony of its metamorphosis, and for Aristophanes' version of the creation. So before we go to the journaling prompts, I just want to reiterate that in some modern approaches to psychology, they have this concept of entropy, moving over a scale of chaos to order. from my point of view, that idea of chaos and order is the idea that the human mind cannot tolerate not knowing, not understanding. It loathes it, it hates it. It can be a symbol of waiting for the bus and the bus is not on time. Did the bus arrive? Maybe the bus line is not going today. Am I late? All this kind of stuff. In Brisbane now they have little sensors. You can tap your phone onto it and it shows you how long before the next bus will come to your stop. You can see how that is a big invention in providing customer service for public transportation. But I think that's a really good example. A lot of people loathe this idea of being uncertain. If they've missed a bus or the bus is not coming, or sometimes they fall and drive by. And so this little tapping box is fantastic. But I hope you can see what I point at, that not knowing, not be able to anticipate, that's can drive the human mind nuts. And so we see is then that the human mind continually endeavors to guess, we all want to know that, but to make predictions and guesses that will become true. So continually try to create chaos, to order out of the chaos, the vast void of the unknown, which is the foundation of all creation, according to the Greek mythology, which is interesting because quantum has similar idea that there always is a level of uncertainty and there are probabilities. And I want to show you after the journaling prompts a video on chaos theory and the butterfly effect, which will be very, very interesting. And I think then we have got a good comprehensive podcast on particularly experience so far, and then we can delve into knowledge. So let's do. I want to read bits of A Course in Miracles, and in particular from chapter 3, which is titled Retraining the Mind. And I think in all of my mental health courses, that's exactly the idea, that a mind can be retrained. And this is how we can aim for mental health whilst being in this earthly life. And it applies to the earthly life and not about your state of original perfection, as is sometimes denoted. So to the Course in Miracles here. So this is the 5th section in the chapter 3, and it's called Perception versus Knowledge. And I thought this is just one way of introducing the idea of knowledge as I use it in this particular podcast. Now, the Course in Miracles is almost like a very repetitive text, just pounding and pounding the same principle or insight or miracle over and over again. But let's read a little bit here. To know is to be certain. Okay, well that makes sense. When you know, you know. A very simple example is my name is Michael. It always will be Michael unless I want to change it, but I don't. And it's also not that easy. And it always was Michael. My parents gave me that name. I know my name is Michael. All right, and I live in the city of Brisbane in Queensland. So this is just knowledge because you're just so certain about it. My body is of the male gender. Also absolute certainty. Okay, so to know is to be certain. Uncertainty merely means that you don't know. I've just seen that, for example, in the Greek mythology, that everything was born out of chaos. And in some of the modern approaches to psychology, we have this dial of entropy between chaos and uncertainty on one end, and then of course order and certainty on the other end. So yeah, uncertainty merely means that you don't know. Now, knowledge is power because it is certain, and certainty is strength. So here's the argumentation. Perception is temporary. It is an attribute of believing you're in space and time. It's therefore subject to fear or love. So the Course in Miracles says there's two major emotions. One is fear, the other is love. Now, when you misperceive, it produces fear. False evidence acting real is one of those examples. And true perception produces love. But, therefore, capital letters, neither produces certainty because all perception varies. So that is why it is not knowledge. True perception is the basis for knowledge, but knowing is the affirmation of truth. Now, here's further argumentation. All of your difficulties ultimately stem from the fact that you do not recognize or know yourself, and therefore each other, or even God. When we speak about recognizing, we mean know again. This means that you knew before, so it's not a discovery, it's a remembrance. Note that it does not mean saw before, so it's not a perception. Again, argumentation. You can see in many ways, because perception involves different interpretations, and this means it is not a whole. So the miracle is a way of perceiving, not a way of knowing. It is the right answer to your question, but you do not ask questions at all when you know. So again, the book is called A Course in Miracles. How can we retrain our minds so we can perceive in a way that points us to remember what we already know. So when you question delusions, it is the first step in undoing them. Yeah. The miracle or the right answer corrects them. Since perceptions change, their dependence on time is obvious, because time and change really are the same idea. They are subject to transitory states, and this implies variability by definition. How you perceive at any given time determines what you do, and action must occur in time. Knowledge is timeless because certainty is not questionable. What is true is always true, and no matter where you think you find yourself, truth is true, always. When you know when you have ceased to ask questions. Now, this goes on a bit, and I don't want to take you through hours and hours of the same point being reiterated. But this is a later section. I think this was dictated in 1965, November the 30th. So we're already looking at close to 61 years ago. Okay? So it said, we said before that the abilities which man possesses are only shadows of his true abilities. The soul's true functions are knowing, loving, and creating. That's why I promote to be creative. Let the action of your mind be creative, because that leads you back to your original state, to knowing your true self, and therefore mental health. Loving and knowing. And loving is not like, oh, I love you so much, but it is all-inclusiveness. Not to be afraid of anything. By including everything in and letting the light shine on it, it will align itself to the truth, which is knowing. Yeah, sounds simple, easy for me to say. Can you give some examples? Yeah, where you looked at Carl Jung's shadow work. So when you stuff emotions and patterns and challenges away, they really will not leave you. They will be there, but you just are afraid of looking at it. At the moment you include them in, now you have assumed responsibility for it, and you can have a complete cleansing out of whatever you no longer want. Yep. If you truly are love, there is no room for anything else, not even a speck of fear or hatred or anger or pain. That's why the world of perception is not part of the world of knowing, because perception inevitably is about dualism, high and low, love and fear, love and pain, etc., etc. Okay, I hope this, at least conceptually, is clear now. So, the soul's true functions are knowing, loving, and creating. The intrusion of the ability to perceive, which is inherently judgmental, yes, of course it is, was introduced only after the separation. No one, not one, has been sure of anything since then. I remember the the chaos theory. You will also remember that I made it very clear that the resurrection was the return to knowledge, which was accomplished by the union of my will with the Father. So, the point is not to rely on anything else but your return to knowledge. Just as my resurrection is my return to knowledge. Take Jesus Christ as an example, but do it for yourself. Now, if you think that the resurrection of one is the resurrection of all, absolutely. If that's the truth, then you can now share that resurrection of anyone you believe has resurrected and make it your own. Okay. So I'm not going to read on. I'm going to mention one sentence in here. It says, knowledge does not require ingenuity at all. So we always relate creativity to be innovative, have ingenuity, lateral thinking, all of that. But once you know, you know. And when we say the truth shall set you free, we mean that all this kind of thinking is a waste of time. But you are free of the need of engaging in it. And of course, while we're here on this planet, we do feel a need of engaging in it. Now, I'm going to show you a few video snippets of people reporting on their near-death experience and about them experiencing knowledge.
So then the light says, Andy, let's go. Do you have any questions for me? And my answer was, no, I don't have any questions. Why? Because when I was absorbed by the light, I knew everything the light knew. I knew everything. Yeah, come on. No, I did. I knew everything about everything when I was in the light.
Even they said there's a 1% chance that we are going to find the source of this bleeding. So they put me under, and as I'm bleeding out, I die. My experience of dying was incredible. I knew immediately that I was back home. It was a place that I couldn't remember on Earth, but that I knew as instantly once I was there that it was home, that it was the place that we all come from. I described it when I came back as space. I was in space. I was one with everything. Every single cell in my body was part of everything. I can literally feel it right now. It was like a tingling to an unbelievable degree. Sometimes I describe it like sinking into a warm tub after a long cold day in the snow, the way that your body just goes wild. It was like that, but there's no body, and it's 10,000 times stronger than that. That's what it felt like. It felt like everything was twinkling, everything was alive, and it was just pure bliss, pure peace, pure love. I felt like I was being held, like I was home with my whole family, and my whole family was literally everything that's ever existed. Everything was everything, and it was all part of this vast, incredible, infinite space of pure love. It gives me chills just recalling it. It was unbelievable. And the thing that struck me when I was there was just a complete and utter lack of fear. I wasn't afraid of anything anymore. I didn't have a body, I wasn't afraid of money, of stuff, money related anything. I wasn't afraid of rent or tax, none of that stuff. I wasn't afraid of having a body, having gravity, having any of that, no shame, no regret, none of that stuff that keeps us up at night that we're like, God, why did I say that? Like none of that stuff was there. I mean, literally no fear of anything at all. It was completely absent of fear. It was truly just pure love, like a twinkling, infinite love. It was all encompassing, and I knew that I was with God. And it was as if God was with me, looking at me, feeling me, being me, experiencing me, holding me, reminding me that I too am love, that love has always been with me. And the thing that I kind of tapped into as a kid was true, was real. That's really what it was all about. And it was as if God said to me, Davis, that's it. It's just love. It's just love. And it was a noun, it was an adjective, it was a verb, it was everything. It's the best word I can use in the English language, but there are no words to describe this particular feeling. It was incredible. And I immediately knew that I was going to be okay. So when the doctors cut me open to try to find the bleeding, they said they had a 1% chance of finding it. And by some miracle, they did. They were able to stop the bleeding. And when they did, I came back. And people often ask, how do you know it was dying and not the coma? And the coma, it was like a nothingness. It's hard to describe the coma. It was like I was in my body, but I wasn't as hyper aware as I was in death. In death, I was like extremely like expansive and growing and alive. It was like the opposite of death, the way that people think about it. It was so energetic. And the coma was like just almost just a nothingness space. And I remember waking up actually at one point in my coma when they were resetting my feet. femur, which apparently really hurt because I was out. I was in a coma for 5 days, and I don't know, 2-3 days into it, they had to reset my femur, and I like woke up and saw the guys doing it and then fell back into the coma. So I knew that was different. I was very in my body for that part. When my family is processing all of this stuff going on, they actually saw the doctor who saved my life. I don't know what country she was from, but she was from Eastern Europe, and she was very serious about her work, and she was very good at her job. But they mentioned that she wasn't necessarily the kindest deliverer of news. She was very stern and said, we cannot find the bleeding, or, he's going to die, or when she walked in to tell my twin brother to say goodbye, she said, he's probably going to die. You have to say goodbye. That kind of level of communication. But one of my parents saw her getting on the elevator at one point, and they said, Doctor, thank you so much for saving my son's life. And she said, I didn't save his life. God did. I just moved my hands, which to me is an incredible miracle. Not the type of thing that particular doctor probably would have said or has said in the past.
Warmth and love. And within my inner vision, I saw this deep blue cloud of light. There's no other way to describe it, that it was though I was in the presence of something so transformative, something so amazing that was filling me and filling the fibers of my very being. And in that moment, I understood the answers to all the questions I no longer needed to ask. I knew the why of my life. I knew why I was a musician. I knew why I had children. I knew why I had been married. I knew my relationship with everyone I had ever known. It's hard to describe that feeling, but it was just knowingness, as though I had been plugged into this giant source of all that is, that was enveloping and embracing me. And the love was so incredible and so all-encompassing. I said to it inwardly, I said, if to know you I must die, then let me die. And I meant that with all my heart. I was ready to go. I was ready to enter this space of love, this unconditional acceptance and love and understanding, and this peace and consciousness that I'd never known before in that way. And this light that was enveloping me spoke back in words. And it said, you do not have to die to know me. And that was a moment of epiphany. It was a moment of transition where everything in my life would be different. And everything up to that point in my life was now viewed through a different lens. And I sat up and I fathomed that for just a minute. I did not have to die to know this incredible love and light and unconditional acceptance that I had never experienced before like that. It had told me I don't have to die to know. And I was stunned. And I realized the import, the magnitude of that upon my life. I realized that, like many people, I carried with me this idea that when I would die, then I would be in the presence of God, that I would know spirit, that I would have this experience that is transcendent in the spiritual realms, that I might meet masters or guides or God or agents of love, and that I would live a good and quality life in order to experience this after death. But those words, you do not have to die to know me, pointed my spiritual compass to the magnetic north of God. It told me that by opening my heart to love, to this love that was present, that because I was in an altered state I was more aware of, that I could experience that love and experience the resonance of that love in my life as I went forward with my life, that it was not something I had to wait for an imagined time of death to know. So then the question is, well, what can I do? What do I do to experience the promise of that I could know this tremendous all-accepting love? It is the love that you hear, it's referred to in scripture as a love that surpasses all understanding. It's this love that many near-death experiences, people refer to this love or an angelic being or this unconditional sense of peace. And I lived that. I experienced that. And so now I was left with, well, what do I do with my life now? How do I find a life of purpose and meaning after having experienced this transcendent moment in the presence of this unconditional love? And so that led me to really focus my attention and interest in how to experience the divine while I'm alive in a physical body. And of course, there are many ways. Many religions talk about that. There's many ways to do it, from walking in nature to prayer to chanting to contemplation and meditation to petting your pet, through a passion with the arts, as I have with music. But I made the connection between this passion of living my life and the purpose of my being. I realized that the purpose of my being was to know that love, to experience that, and then to be a pipe open on both ends so the love could enter me and flow through me to
Hopefully, after watching these 3 short snippets of near-death experiences, you get a gist of the difference between perception or experience, which is perceptional, and knowledge. So to know yourself, you're certain. No more anxiety, stress, or uncertainty, which is the most aggravating idea to your mind, is uncertainty. So how can you access that knowledge? Well, life on planet Earth is perceptional experience. To access knowledge, to remember it, you can't work hard on it. It's just like the Zen chaos is like, well, master, if I work really hard of it, will I be enlightened? Nah, it will probably take you a billion times longer. There must be a fracture in your perception of self that breaks you free from the sense of self and give you that experience of remembering who you truly are. So with psychedelics, just give you a sense of oneness with everything. So there is a part of the brain that actually synthesizes the perception that there's me and I finish here at the skin of my body, and then there's this outer reality, and the biochemical effect of the psychedelic um, changes the function of particular the default mode network so that you don't experience that anymore. But it is not a true experience. It's still a perceptional hallucination. Like the guy who took Tom, who took 25 um, ceremonies with ayahuasca, and they were mostly positive, but he realized he still had to do the work, the shadow work. So we looked at the Course in Miracles that said your mind originally was created for knowledge and for love and creative action. So love means all inclusion, all inclusiveness, include all, an abstraction of everything. To be whole, give all to all is a statement of the Course in Miracles as one of the lessons that the Holy Spirit teaches. So in your life of planet Earth, it is a different level though. So we've seen there's this planetary life, there's an other dimension of the astral realm, and then there's the level of truth and reality. And we've touched on the interconnectivity of everything. This idea of being individual is actually a deception. It's an illusion. It's not really true. And therefore, you see in a lot of this spiritual text, like we're in reality, in truth, we're all one, or at least we're all connected. And the experience of one is recorded, and the universe never loses anything, and that experience is available to everyone else. So you really don't have to go through all these lives and learn stuff about, you know, whatever. You can actually just assimilate and be whole with the experiences of everyone else. So therefore, when I teach mental health, I do say it's like you cannot force these enlightening experience to come about. The Holy Spirit cometh like a thief during the night. So when you sleep cozy and you're not alert, not on guard, and not analyzing, there is a chance of the light to come in. And I've seen lots of people who receive the light and it's still as dumb, and they can be very stereotypical. They're still full of the Dunning-Kruger effect and all of their biases. So just to get the light doesn't mean that like I become all-knowing, but it is a tool that you can use to transform and continue transforming till the moment. where you fully remember who you truly are. And we saw that universal experience that people had with psychedelics, but particularly Jim Carrey through, studying, contemplating, meditating. We call them mystical experiences, near-death experiences. There's lots of these experiences that can lead you to the memory of knowing where you're home, knowing who you truly are. But you see, then you sink back out of it, back to planet Earth. And if you don't, you're not coming back to tell anyone about it. So yeah, it can be very, very frustrating if you really want to have that experience of knowledge and knowing who you truly are, the light and everything. However, the key to remember is to have the intent that you wanted, but not to overzealously pursue it. No, you can change your mind, so you can retrain your mind. You can look at all the unworthiness that's in your shadow, and you can, by experiencing now a new experiences where you're worthy, where you have self-respect, where you've set your boundaries and the rest of it, and your future will change because you're giving your brain new ways of interpreting situations and support you in your strength and in your self-respect, for example. So in my courses that I do for the University Third Age, and I have them on the on the YouTube as well, and I've got a website called Project Love app with more free materials, but also a paid course where you can truly undertake the steps of retraining your mind so you purify first. You have to be undone from a lot of stuff. Now, we don't have to go on forever, so I've done 11 lessons. Each lesson has a principle, has self-awareness, has a new range of possibilities, and of course, transformation in it. The second 11 lessons are how to create vision for yourself, vision of what is creation, who am I, and the third 11 lessons are on energy, doing your own energy work. But that's it for this particular podcast 4, knowledge versus experience or knowledge versus perception. So I hope you enjoyed it. And of course, last but not least, to finish the final set of journaling prompts for this podcast. Cheers. Bye.